All right, so we've got a pretty hefty stack of readings here all about the Romantic period in English literature.
Quite a bit to unpack.
Yeah, it looks like you're looking for a solid overview of the era. And
A bit more than just an overview, I think.
yeah, and some of those, aha moments
Uh-huh.
about how it connects to some of the bigger picture ideas and events.
And that's what makes this period so fascinating. It was a time of immense change and upheaval.
Okay, so definitely not going to be a calm and peaceful deep dive then.
Not exactly. Think revolution, social upheaval, questioning everything.
All right, buckle up, everyone. But before we get swept up in the storm, can we maybe take a step back and
Sure.
define what romantic even means in this context? I mean, when I hear the word, I have to admit, I tend to think of, flowing gowns and moonlit walks and...
Ah, yes, the popular image of romanticism.
Right. Not exactly what comes to mind when you think about revolutions and upheaval.
And that's where the term itself can be a bit misleading. You see, it wasn't actually widely used during the period itself.
Oh, really?
Yes. The Romantic period in England spanned from 1785 to 1832. And before that, writers of the time were simply seen as carrying on the traditions of the previous century.
So they thought they were just, following in the footsteps of their literary predecessors, and then bam, history slaps a label on them, declaring them part of this revolutionary new movement.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that these labels are often applied retrospectively. It's only with hindsight that we can see the patterns and trends that defined a particular artistic movement.
That makes sense. So then this whole notion of romanticism emerges from a period of really intense change.
Absolutely. We have the American and French revolutions igniting debates about individual rights and challenging traditional power structures.
And it wasn't just happening across the ocean either, right? I mean, the timeline in the Norton Anthology highlights that the Romantic period began with the establishment of the Society for Effecting the Abolition of the Slave Trade.
In 1787, right here in England.
Right here in England. And then, boom, just a couple of years later, the French Revolution kicks off. The energy must have been palpable.
It was a time of intense intellectual and social ferment.
Yeah.
And alongside these political earthquakes, you have the Industrial Revolution transforming the very fabric of society.
Cities swelling with people seeking work, factories springing up like mushrooms.
But those factories weren't exactly pleasant places, were they?
Not exactly. I mean, think dark satanic mills, to borrow Blake's vivid description.
Precisely. The Industrial Revolution had a profound impact on the environment and on the lives of working people. And this is where things get really interesting.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
The Norton Anthology actually divides the Romantic period into two distinct phases. The Age of Revolution from 1789 to 1815.
Okay.
And then the Romance Revival, which started during the Victorian era and continued through to the final defeat of Napoleon and France's resurgence in the early 19th century.
Okay, so two distinct phases within the Romantic period. Got it. So with all this revolution and upheaval happening, how did writers of the time respond? I mean, was it all doom and gloom or?
It was certainly a time of great anxiety and uncertainty, but it was also a time of incredible creativity and intellectual energy. Writers were grappling with these massive changes, trying to make sense of them and to imagine new possibilities for the future.
And that's where William Blake comes in, right? He's kind of our case study for this deep dive. How did he, as a writer, engage with all this revolutionary fervor and societal transformation?
Blake is a prime example of how romantic writers didn't shy away from tackling the big issues of their day. He wasn't some isolated poet writing about flowers and love.
Right, he was right in the thick.
He was deeply engaged with social issues like poverty and justice, and as you mentioned, the horrors of industrialization. He even directly challenged institutions like the church, questioning their role in perpetuating these problems.
He definitely didn't hold back. There's that powerful quote from Blake where he criticizes those who, under pretense of abolishing slavery and the slave trade, they have not only been the means of inhibiting ruin and desolation throughout the French West India colonies, and in some of those belonging to Great Britain, St. Vincent's and Grenada, inhabited by French, but also of abolishing the Christian religion as it existed in those countries. That's a pretty bold statement. Was that a common view at the time?
Blake was a visionary, often misunderstood even in his own time. To understand his perspective, we need to consider the historical context. He wrote that in 1802, just a few years after the Haitian Revolution, where enslaved Africans successfully fought for their freedom and established an independent nation.
Wow.
This event, along with ongoing debates about the slave trade in Britain, deeply influenced Blake's thinking.
So he saw a connection between the abolitionist movement and the potential for broader societal change.
Exactly. He saw the potential for broader societal change, even religious reform tied to the abolitionist movement. But he was also skeptical of those who used the abolitionist cause for their own gain or failed to address the systemic issues that allowed slavery to flourish.
So he was calling for a more radical and systemic approach to social change, not just superficial reforms.
Precisely. He was challenging people to look beyond the surface, to see the deeper roots of injustice, and to imagine a more just and equitable world.
He really was ahead of his time in many ways. So how did this revolutionary spirit manifest in his poetry specifically? Was he writing explicitly about these issues, or was it more subtle?
Blake's poetry is anything but straightforward. He was a master of symbolism and layered meaning. He wasn't interested in simply stating the obvious. He wanted to provoke, to challenge, to make his readers see the world anew.
Okay, so not your typical roses are red, violets are blue kind of poet.
Not at all. He was a visionary who used his poetry to explore the depths of human experience and to challenge conventional ways of thinking.
That makes me even more curious to explore his work. I know we have the lamb and the tiger from Songs of Innocence and Experience in our sources. Are those good examples of how Blake used symbolism to tackle complex themes?
They're perfect examples. These two poems, often studied together, showcase Blake's genius for using contrasting imagery to explore profound questions about good and evil creation and the nature of God.
All right, I'm ready to unpack those poems, but before we do, can we maybe step back for a second and talk about the bigger picture of how Romanticism redefined what poetry could be? Because Blake wasn't the only one pushing boundaries, right?
Absolutely. One of the defining features of Romanticism was a rejection of the rigid rules and conventions of the previous era, the neoclassical period. Romantic poets were less interested in formal perfection and more interested in expressing genuine emotion and exploring individual experience.
So it was about breaking free from the constraints of the past and embracing a more spontaneous, passionate way of creating art.
Exactly. And that rebellious spirit was fueled by a growing belief in the power of the individual imagination. Remember, this was a time when philosophers like Immanuel Kant were revolutionizing how we understand the mind.
Oh, right, Kant. I remember skimming over his ideas in one of the sources. Could you maybe remind me how his philosophy tied into the Romantic movement? I remember something about the mind actively shaping our reality.
Kant argued that our minds don't simply passively receive information from the world, they actively shape and structure our experience of reality.
Right, so our perceptions, thoughts, feelings, they all contribute to how we understand the world around us.
Precisely. It's not just about what's out there, it's about how we make sense of it through our own unique lens.
That's a pretty radical idea. It's like saying we're not just observers, we're co-creators of our own reality.
And that idea had a profound impact on how artists and writers approached their work. Instead of simply imitating nature or adhering to strict rules, they felt empowered to explore their own unique perspectives and to use their imagination to create new worlds and challenge conventional ways of thinking.
And Blake's idea of the poetic genius fits perfectly into this framework, right? Can you elaborate on what he meant by that term? It sounds pretty powerful.
For Blake, the poetic genius was this innate creative force within each individual, capable of perceiving the world in new ways, challenging the status quo, and inspiring change through imagination.
It's not just about writing pretty poems, it's about using creativity to tap into a deeper truth and to envision new possibilities.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the transformative power of art and the role that imagination plays in shaping our understanding of ourselves and the world.
It's like the poetic genius is a superhero of the mind, battling conformity and inspiring us to see the world with fresh eyes.
That's a great way to put it. And for Blake, this concept was intimately tied to his own artistic practice, particularly his concept of myth-making.
Myth-making. Okay, now I'm intrigued. Was he just retelling old myths, or was he creating something entirely new?
Blake wasn't content with simply inheriting the myths of the past. He believed in the power of creating new myths, new symbolic systems to explore the complexities of the human condition and challenge conventional ways of thinking about good and evil power and authority, even the nature of reality itself.
So he was building his own universe, his own mythology to convey his ideas and explore these big timeless questions.
Exactly. He was a true visionary who recognized the power of myth to shape our understanding of the world. And he wasn't afraid to create his own myths to challenge the dominant narratives of his time.
Wow. And he was doing it all within this context of revolution and societal upheaval. It's amazing how he was able to weave together these different strands.
That's the beauty of Blake's work, the way he blends personal vision with social commentary, artistic innovation with spiritual exploration. He truly embodies the spirit of Romanticism in all its complexity and depth.
Okay, so we've got this era of revolution and rapid change. this rejection of old rules, and a celebration of individual imagination. And a poet like Blake, who's using his art to challenge the status quo and explore profound questions about humanity and the world. Did I miss anything?
You've captured the essence perfectly. And with that solid foundation, I think we're ready to delve into the lamb and the tiger and see how Blake's poetic genius shines through. So let's start with the lamb from Blake's Songs of Innocence and Experience.
Okay.
It's a great example of the innocence part of that collection. The poem features a child speaker addressing a lamb, a symbol of purity and gentleness. The language is simple, almost childlike, reflecting that sense of innocence.
Right. I remember that opening line, "Little lamb who made thee." It's so direct, so innocent. You can almost hear a child's voice asking that question.
Exactly. And throughout the poem, the child speaker links the lamb to the figure of Christ.
Oh, right. He is called by thy name, for he calls himself a lamb.
Precisely. This connection reinforces the theme of innocence and divine creation, presenting a world where goodness and harmony prevail.
It's a very comforting, almost idyllic image. But I know the tiger offers a pretty stark contrast.
Indeed, in the tiger, the tone shifts dramatically. The gentle lamb is replaced by a fearsome tiger, a creature of power and ferocity. The speaker directly asks, "Tiger, tiger burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry?"
Wow, that imagery is so striking. Burning bright, fearful symmetry. It's a far cry from the gentle world of the lamb.
Exactly. And this shift in imagery reflects a shift in Blake's focus. In the tiger, he's grappling with darker, more complex questions about creation.
Right, like if the same God created both the gentle lamb and the fearsome tiger, then what does that tell us about the nature of divinity?
Precisely. Is God purely benevolent, or is there a darker side to creation? These are questions that Blake doesn't shy away from.
And he doesn't offer any easy answers, does he?
Not at all. He presents us with the paradox of creation, the coexistence of innocence, and experience good and evil, beauty and terror. He's asking us to confront the complexity of the world and to question simplistic notions of divinity.
So it's not all sunshine and lambs. There are tigers out there too, and we need to acknowledge their existence.
Precisely. And by presenting these contrasting images, he forces us to engage with that complexity and to form our own conclusions about the nature of creation and the human condition.
It's so much more thought-provoking than simply being told what to believe. It's like he's inviting us to participate in the conversation.
Exactly. He wants us to grapple with these big questions alongside him, to wrestle with the paradoxes, and to embrace the mystery of existence.
Speaking of challenges, I'm curious about how Blake's contemporaries reacted to his work. Did they embrace his radical ideas, or were they more resistant to his unconventional approach?
Blake was definitely not a mainstream figure in his time. His work was often seen as too radical, too obscure, too challenging for the average reader. He has a small but devoted following, but he also faced criticism for his unconventional style and his willingness to challenge societal norms.
So kind of like a cult classic, appreciated by a select few but not widely understood or accepted during his lifetime.
That's a good analogy. And it speaks to the fact that truly innovative artists often operate on the fringes, pushing boundaries and challenging conventions in ways that can be unsettling or even threatening to the status quo. It often takes time for their vision to be fully appreciated and understood.
That makes me wonder, what is it about Blake's work that resonates so powerfully with readers even centuries later? Why do we still find his poetry so compelling?
I think there are a few reasons. First, Blake was a master of language. His poetry is rich with imagery, symbolism, and emotional depth. Even if we don't fully grasp the meaning on a first read, we're drawn to the beauty and power of his words.
Right, like those lines from the Tyger about fearful symmetry and burning bright. It's just so visceral, so evocative.
Exactly. And it's not just the language. There's something about his ideas that still feels relevant today.
Right.
Blake was wrestling with questions that are still central to our human experience.
Yeah.
Good versus evil innocence, versus experience the power of imagination, the search for meaning in a chaotic world. These are timeless themes that resonate across cultures and generations.
That's so true. And in a world that's still grappling with social injustice, environmental destruction, and political turmoil, Blake's voice feels more vital than ever.
Absolutely. He reminds us that art can be a powerful tool for social critique, a way to challenge the status quo and inspire change. He encourages us to question authority, to think for ourselves, and to use our imaginations to create a better world.
And that's a message that never goes out of style. Okay, so we've explored Blake's powerful use of symbolism and his engagement with the big questions of his time. But before we move on, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, the two phases of Romanticism. How did that shift from the Age of Revolution to the Romance revival manifest in the literature? Was it a sudden change or more of a gradual evolution?
It was more of a gradual evolution, with writers responding to the changing social and political landscape in different ways. During the early Romantic period, the focus was often on the immediate impact of the revolutions, the upheaval, the social injustices that were being brought to light. We see this in Blake's work, as we've discussed.
Right, he was right there in the thick of it, tackling those issues head on. So what changed in the later period?
As the initial fervor of the revolution subsided and the Industrial Revolution continued to reshape society, there was a growing sense of disillusionment among some writers. The world was changing rapidly, and not always for the better. There was a sense of loss, a longing for a simpler time.
So a sense of nostalgia for a simpler time, perhaps?
Exactly. There was a renewed interest in the past, particularly the medieval period, which was seen as a time of greater spirituality, chivalry, and connection to nature. This fascination with the past, known as medievalism, became a prominent feature of the Romance revival.
Ah, so that explains the popularity of Gothic novels. Poems set in faraway lands, the resurgence of folklore and mythology. It's like they were seeking refuge in the past, a way to escape the harsh realities of the industrializing present.
That's a great way to put it. But it wasn't just about escapism. This interest in the past was also a way of questioning the present, of searching for alternative models for society and human experience.
So it's like this yearning for the past can also be a way of critiquing the present, of imagining different possibilities for the future.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this period so rich and complex. It's not just about reacting to historical events. It's about grappling with those events on a deeper level, exploring their implications for human identity, society, the very nature of art itself.
Okay, so we've covered the revolutionary spirit, the shift towards individual imagination, Blake's powerful poetry, and this fascinating interplay between the past and the present. But I know the Romantic period wasn't just about poetry. It was also a time of great innovation in prose, right? Thinking specifically about the rise of novelists.
You're absolutely right. The Romantic period witnessed an explosion in the popularity of novels, and this development is intrinsically tied to many of the themes we've been discussing. Remember how we talked about the growing emphasis on individual experience and the exploration of complex emotions?
Yeah.
Well, the novel provided the perfect form for delving into these areas.
Right, because novels allow us to enter into the minds and hearts of characters, to experience the world through their eyes, to feel their joys and sorrows, their struggles and triumphs.
Precisely. And that's what captivated readers during this period. Novels offered a window into the complexities of human nature, a way to explore the nuances of relationships and to grapple with the social and moral dilemmas of the time.
It's almost like the novel democratized literature in a way. Suddenly, everyone had access to these stories that explored the depths of human experience, not just a select few who could appreciate poetry or philosophical treatises.
You've hit upon a crucial point. The rise of novels coincided with the dramatic expansion of the reading public. Thanks to advances in printing technology and a growing middle class with more leisure time and disposable income, books became more affordable and accessible than ever before.
So it's not just about what writers were producing, it's also about who was reading those works. And this new, wider audience had a huge impact on what kind of stories were being told.
Exactly. Novelists were now writing for a more diverse audience with a range of tastes and interests. This led to a greater variety of genres and styles, from the social satire of Jane Austen to the historical epics of Walter Scott.
Okay, so we've got Austen and Scott as key figures in this rise of the novel. Can you tell me a bit more about their contributions and how they reflect the broader themes of Romanticism?
Jane Austen, with her witty observations of social manners and her focus on the inner lives of her characters, exemplifies the romantic interest in exploring individual experience and the complexities of human relationships.
Okay.
Her novels like Pride and Prejudice and Sensibility offer sharp social commentary, while also celebrating the power of love and individual choice within the constraints of societal expectations.
It's amazing how she was able to capture those nuanced dynamics within the seemingly mundane world of 19th century English society. Her work still feels so fresh and relevant today.
It's a testament to her keen observation and her ability to create characters that feel real and relatable, even centuries later.
And what about Walter Scott? How does his work fit into this picture?
Walter Scott, on the other hand, is known for his historical novels, which tapped into that romantic fascination with the past. His works like Ivanhoe and Rob Roy transported readers to bygone eras, exploring themes of chivalry, adventure, and the clash between different cultures and values.
So he was feeding that hunger for adventure and escape while also offering insights into history and the human condition.
Precisely. And by setting his stories in the past, Scott was able to explore contemporary social and political issues in a less direct but often more profound way. He could comment on the changing nature of society, the impact of industrialization, and the tensions between tradition and modernity through the lens of history.
It's fascinating how the past can be used to illuminate the present, to make us think about our own time in new ways.
And that's one of the enduring legacies of the Romantic period, this recognition that the past is not simply something to be left behind, but a source of inspiration, insight, and even critique.
All right, so we've got these two literary giants, Austen and Scott, representing different facets of the Romantic sensibility, both capturing the imagination of a rapidly expanding reading public. But it wasn't just about novels, right? There was a whole ecosystem developing around literature during this time.
You're right. The rise of novels went hand in hand with the proliferation of literary magazines and reviews. These publications provided a platform for literary criticism debate and the dissemination of new ideas.
So it's like a whole new world of literary discourse was opening up, with readers and critics actively engaging with the works being produced.
Exactly. This created a more dynamic and interactive literary landscape where writers weren't just speaking into a void, but were part of a vibrant conversation with their readers. And this in turn influenced the direction of literature as writers responded to the feedback and critiques they received.
It's amazing how all these developments, the social and political changes, the philosophical shifts, the technological innovations, all came together to create this fertile ground for artistic expression and exploration. It's like all the pieces were falling into place to usher in this new era of literature.
And the impact of this period continues to be felt today.
Yeah.
The Romantics expanded our understanding of what literature could be, pushing boundaries, experimenting with form, and exploring the full range of human experience in ways that continue to inspire and challenge us.
It's truly remarkable how a group of writers working over 200 years ago can still speak to us so powerfully today. Their words have this timeless quality, this ability to transcend time and place and touch on something deeply human. But before we get too sentimental, I want to make sure we haven't missed any key elements of Romanticism.
You've done a fantastic job of highlighting the major themes and developments, but there's one more aspect that I think is worth mentioning: the romantic relationship with nature.
Oh, right. Nature was a huge theme for the Romantics, wasn't it? But it wasn't just about pretty landscapes and babbling brooks, was it? There was a deeper connection, a philosophical underpinning to their fascination with the natural world.
Exactly. The Romantics saw nature as more than just a source of beauty or a backdrop for human drama. They viewed it as a source of inspiration, spiritual renewal, and even moral guidance. They believed that by immersing oneself in nature, one could tap into a deeper truth and a sense of interconnectedness with the universe.
It's like they were seeking a kind of spiritual solace in nature, a way to reconnect with something larger than themselves in a world that was becoming increasingly industrialized and fragmented.
That's a great way to put it. And this reverence for nature was often tied to a critique of the Industrial Revolution and its impact on the environment and human well-being. They saw the destruction of natural landscapes, the pollution of rivers and air, and the exploitation of natural resources as a betrayal of this sacred connection.
It's almost as if they were prophetic in their concerns about the environmental challenges we face today. They were sounding the alarm bells about the dangers of unchecked industrial growth long before climate change became a mainstream issue.
They were definitely ahead of their time in many ways. And their writings on nature offer us a valuable perspective on the importance of preserving the natural world, not just for its beauty, but for our own spiritual and psychological well-being.
It's a reminder that we are part of nature, not separate from it, and that our actions have consequences for the delicate balance of the ecosystem.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's a message that resonates more strongly than ever in our current age of environmental crisis.
Okay, so we've got this profound connection with nature, a fascination with the past, a celebration of individual imagination, a flourishing of novels and literary discourse, and a poet like Blake who embodies the revolutionary spirit of the age. I think we've covered a lot of ground, but I'm curious, what stood out to you most from all these sources and discussions? What sparked your interest or made you see the Romantic period in a new light?
For me, it's that emphasis on the power of the individual imagination that really stands out.
It's a powerful concept, isn't it?
Yeah, it feels so relevant today.
Yeah.
Even more so than when I first started looking into this stuff.
Absolutely. The idea that we can shape our reality with our minds, that we can envision new possibilities and then strive to create them.
Right.
It's incredibly empowering.
It makes me think about how we often talk about the romantic legacy, as if it's,
Something fixed.
yeah, something fixed, something that belongs to the past.
Right.
But maybe it's more accurate to say that the romantic spirit is something that's constantly evolving.
I think that's a great way to put it. Yeah, something that's being reinterpreted and reinvented by each new generation of artists and writers and thinkers.
Exactly. The Romantics weren't just producing art, they were sparking a conversation.
A conversation.
About the role of the individual, the relationship between humanity and nature, the power of art to inspire change. And that conversation is still ongoing.
So instead of viewing Romanticism as this closed chapter in history, we can see it as a living tradition.
Yes.
A source of inspiration that continues to shape how we think about ourselves and the world around us.
Precisely. And that's why it's so important to keep revisiting these works, to engage with their ideas, to challenge ourselves to see the world through their eyes. Because their questions are still our questions.
Right, how do we navigate this rapidly changing world? How do we find meaning and purpose in this increasingly complex society?
How do we use our individual voices to make a difference?
And how do we balance our human needs with the needs of the planet? I mean, the Romantics were already grappling with the environmental impact of industrialization.
Yes, as we discussed.
Yeah.
They offer valuable insights into how we might approach the ecological challenges we face today.
Their reverence for nature, their understanding of the interconnectedness of all living things,
Yes.
their critique of unchecked industrial growth.
All themes that speak directly to our current concerns
Exactly.
about climate change, pollution, and the depletion of natural resources.
It's like they were sending a message through time,
Message.
urging us to pay attention,
Yes.
to learn from their insights.
And to find.
Yeah, and to find a more sustainable path forward.
Exactly. The Romantics remind us that we are part of nature, not separate from it,
Right.
and that our actions have consequences.
For the delicate balance of the ecosystem.
Precisely.
So we've got this profound connection with nature, a fascination with the past, a celebration of individual imagination,
Yes.
a flourishing of novels and literary discourse.
And let's not forget,
Right.
a poet like Blake, who truly embodies the revolutionary spirit of the age.
I think we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
Yeah, we have.
But before we wrap up,
Sure.
I have one final question for you to ponder, dear listener. If Blake were alive today, what issues would he be writing about?
What injustices would he be railing against?
Yeah, how would he use his art to challenge the status quo and inspire change?
We'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Share your reflections, your insights, your own creative responses to the legacy of the Romantics.
Because their story
Is also our story.
a story that's still being written.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time.
Keep exploring
Oh, keep questioning.
and keep imagining.